Episode 28 of the Geekdom101 podcast is a very special episode and one that's different from the others. This thing originally aired on November 7th, 2019, and I was joined by scientist and engineer Keith Comito from Lifespan.io. And this was a very important podcast to me because it was more serious. It wasn't really about like nerd stuff and movies and things that we have been accustomed to discussing on the podcast. Instead, this was more about the research he's been doing and he's been helping to develop in biotech and cell manipulation to reduce aging and to prolong life. He's actually working on curing a number of diseases in the Northeast with other scientists and engineers. He's working on figuring out ways to kind of regenerate cell tissue, and they've made a lot of breakthroughs, especially in the HIV department, which I think we do discuss a little bit here on the podcast. And he goes into some of his discoveries. He was a great guest to have on. He was actually on World of Geekdom a while ago discussing he's debunking the whole idea about population control from Thanos and how it doesn't really make sense in the real world, but some think it does. He's basically all about that. But one of the most intelligent discussions I've had here on the show and one of the most important. So I would highly recommend that you not only listen to this, but you spread this out to those who you think might benefit from it, because it's a great discussion. And, I love science. I'm not a science nerd, but this type of science I'm really into and I love hearing about, although I'm not an expert. So he definitely has worked with experts, and that's why I think the things he says are important. Anyways, that's episode 28. Let's get to it right now. And welcome back to the Geekdom101 podcast. And joining me here on this episode of the show, he is the president and co-founder of the Life Extension Advocacy Foundation. We're going to be discussing that on here as well as some nerd talk. Science fiction becomes science fact because this man is working on some big projects to basically extend humanity's life. We're going to get real deep into that here in a minute. And also make people feel healthier and cure diseases. And there's a lot of cool stuff coming around with this. Please welcome Keith. Can I say your last name? I forgot to ask you that question.
Sure, go right ahead.
Is it Comito?
Close, Comito.
That's what I said, Comito.
Well, you made it sound a little more Japanese, which is cool, but yeah.
It's cool, yeah. I've actually never, we've talked a bunch of times. You've been on World of Geekdom, but I've never actually asked you how to pronounce your last name. It's not Comito, so.
No, I've heard Comito too. It's just Comito, which I think in Spanish is like I ate in the past tense.
That would be comido, but yeah, you're right.
And I do like food, so there you go.
Right. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. For those of you who have never heard Keith before, with me, he actually did do a couple of videos on World of Geekdom. We discussed the population video with Thanos and a couple of Doctor Strange stuff. But this is your first time here on the podcast because I want to really take a deep dive into what it is that you're doing with Lifespan.io with Leaf, because this is sort of stuff that I don't think is being covered by the mainstream media as much as it should be, and stuff that's kind of important for the future of mankind.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that in the past couple of years, I have seen definitely an uptick in coverage of this topic, but obviously it can be over sensationalized. So it's important to level set where we're actually at. So, we can get into that, if you have any specific questions to start things off to orientate the audience.
Yeah, no, for sure. And actually, it's kind of funny because when I found you, I found you in 2015. What happened was I was rebranding my website from my Super Friends Universe website. I was online looking for talent, and I found you on the Retromanters, and I'm like, okay, well, this is just a dude who loves video games. They're pretty funny. They cover classic games. I had a podcast at the time where I covered classic games. Let me reach out to him. And so I reached out to you, and, we worked together on a couple things. I saw, some of the stuff you were putting out. And then, it's just funny because when I see you, it's like, okay, well, it's just some random, kind of just a regular guy. You're just a regular dude, and just talking about video games on the internet. That's what you, for fun. Okay, he wants to blow up on YouTube. That's his goal. But then I come to find out you're this freaking scientist engineer who is working with Disney now, as well as working on projects to possibly extend people's lives to live longer and healthier, and maybe even not cure death. We'll talk about that in a minute, but help humanity just become better health wise. And I'm just like blown away. Like, wait a minute, hold on. Like, because you never know, people. You never know. I'm like, this guy's working with investors and millionaires to get lifespan over and get the projects going. And I'm just sitting there like, I thought you were just some video game nerd.
Yeah, well, to actually, give a point towards the value of like video gaming, these things don't have to be separate. So I will say that actually, I think my love of video gaming, which is, again, like where I first was on YouTube with that channel Retromancers, kind of led me to these topics. There's a lot of games, like Xenogears, for example, we've talked about before, off air. That game had a lot of like life extension and all that sort of stuff in it. Games like Deus Ex, for example. And a lot of those games when I was younger sort of sparked that interest in me of like, oh, this sounds like something that could actually happen. So, back in the day when people would say like video games are not art or not inspirational, I really had a problem with that because personally video games were like almost my gateway into this sort of, scientific landscape.
I feel like when it comes to like nerd stuff, I've noticed that with the exception of maybe, some of the Avengers movies, a lot of the stuff's a big disappointment lately, but video games seem to really kick. Spider-Man PS4 told a better story than most of the Spider-Man movies did. It's a trip. So I think video games as an art form for storytelling, have evolved. Like I said, Batman Arkham Asylum and Batman Arkham City could be considered better than than many of the Batman movies. Like it's crazy to think about. It's the same thing with animation too. Animation never gets the kind of love from the critics, not the younger ones like us, but like the older ones and the Academy. When you've got films like Mask of the Phantasm, which could be considered the best Batman movie of all time, everybody wanks off Dark Knight, but Phantasm was just as good. And I feel like these are things that with our generation, it's starting to really. I guess we'd be considered the boomers? I learned that term the other day, like Gen X or whatever. Like, I feel like we're changing the world, and then the Gen Z might take it to the next level, it seems.
Yeah, I think the boomers are our parents. I think we're Gen X or Gen Y, or maybe on the upper cusp of millennial, not quite there.
Yeah, I don't even follow this stuff because, dude, I've seen people debate over this shit constantly, all the time. Like, what are we, But I wanted to talk to you about, so I met you with the Retromancers. We had some discussions, and, you really kind of opened my eyes because at first when I talked to you about the lifespan stuff, and you've been on the Young Turks and other big places, way bigger than me, but, you were talking about, like, the possibility of sort of extending life. And I remember the first thing I said was, what are you trying to, like, make us immortal? Like, and we thought that we had this really crazy discussion about like transhumanism and uploading our brains to hard drives. Do you remember that conversation? It was like from 3 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a good way to sort of like open the topic for your audience that might not be kind of introduced to these terms yet. So basically, like the short version is obviously humanity has been interested in trying to extend healthy lifespans since, literally the first thing ever written or the first great work, the Epic of Gilgamesh, on some clay tablets, right? But
right.
But obviously, attempts throughout history have not, gone so well. Chinese emperors trying to like drink mercury, and that didn't work out so well. And so obviously you have this history of like charlatanism, snake oil, right? And that's kind of been where we've been until like maybe 20 years ago, where actually, on cutting edge but legitimate biotechnology research, about maybe 10, 12 years ago, the field has started to mature to see, well, actually there may be some specific areas of intervention that can address the aging process directly. And that's starting to get more and more buzz and legitimacy. And we could talk about, some specific aspects of that, but I just kind of wanted to, orientate your audience that basically what we do at Lifespan, like, what I'm trying to do is basically help the most credible research projects here by raising funding on, our crowdfunding site, lifespan.io.
Yeah, but plug also, whatever you want to plug right now, bro. Go for it.
Yeah, that's our main site for like crowdfunding is lifespan.io. And then we also have like the most traffic news outlet on Leaf, like flowers, leafscience.org. And that's like almost doubling in traffic like every couple of months. It's crazy. But one of our main missions is to sort of contextualize what's going on for the public, specifically for like what you said. People might want to lump in like really deep cut transhumanism stuff, like putting your brain in a machine.
That's not really what it's about. Yeah.
No, well, there's a full spectrum here, and don't get me wrong, that stuff is totally interesting, right? But obviously, if you're trying to get things to actually happen and to help cure diseases, you have to kind of do things in the right order, right? So there's certain things that are kind of like low-hanging fruit that we can do right now and have like a big effect.
Yeah. Your goal would be to essentially give people the option to live possibly healthier lives. And I remember one of the things we talked about, and there's been more research done on this, but one of the things we talked about, and I'm trying to what I'm going to try to do here is kind of bring back that conversation, but I have vague memories of it, is you were discussing how back then, we talked about it 3 years ago, not recorded, but you were discussing how there were nanotech bots that they haven't been invented yet, but they're being worked on and discussed, and it's very early, but they're very microscopic robots that can literally go into your body and clean up your cells, because the whole idea behind anti-aging is your cells get old. So if we can figure out a way to go into the cell itself and, kind of rebuild it back up again, it could end up leading to us maybe looking like we're like Stallone. Stallone's 74, but he looks like he's 44. We could all be like Stallone, I feel like. You know what I mean? That's like, could you elaborate on that? Is that the main project, or are there other things? I remember you mentioned on the Young Turks about how there was a recent discovery made about certain cells, how they don't have to die. Like, do you mind going into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So as far as the nanotechnology question, that I would say will sort of be like phase two. Like, we're not there yet.
That's way in the future.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say crazy in the future. Maybe again, I'm really just sort of speculating, riffing here. That's in like maybe 20, 30 years where that sort of stuff might become more feasible. Where we're at now is basically what's happened is the research community has sort of organized around like 7 to 9 types of damage that build up in your body. So the analogy that's often used, which is a good one, is a car. It's like, think of a car getting older and rusting and such. It's like you could try to intervene very early in that process and like stop the process of rust. But in the body analogy of that, that's like metabolism, and that's like way too complicated. This is like the free radical stuff. It's like you can't change something in your metabolism without like changing like 5 million other things that you don't know. So it's too hard to do that. And then conversely, if you try to like, do like geriatrics when someone's already like very damaged at like 90 years old, it's like kind of too late. So the sweet spot is like a car. You don't really need to understand like how rust works to know that you can just periodically like clean up that rust and keep the car running in good shape, repairing the damages that accumulate. So there's like 7 to 9 damages. The classifications are still kind of, being not argued about, but, discussed. So it's like sometimes 7, sometimes 9. And to answer your question specifically, one of these that's sort of become the new hotness in biotech research is called senescent cells. So basically, this is like as you grow older, just as a natural consequence of living, sometimes your cells go into this state called senescence, which is like they stop dividing, they sort of become inert. And usually they're supposed to sort of self-destruct after that and, make way for new cells. But as you get older, they kind of fail to get this message, and you sort of end up with these like zombie cells that haven't killed themselves and are kind of like rotting in the body and like turning their neighbors into them too. So zombies are actually really a good analogy. So
it's like a plague almost, man.
Yeah. So what's happening is there's these new classes of drugs that are on the horizon called Senolytics, which literally mean like lysis means cut. So it's like cutting the senescent cells or killing them. So it basically, you could take a drug that will specifically target these types of cells and basically say like, yo, you forgot to kill yourself. Now do that, please. And then, they'll clean out of the body.
Is that dangerous though to do something like that? Like, have they tested that on people yet?
It's being tested in like dogs and such, and there's a company called Unity right now that actually is in human clinical trials. But to answer your question, it's something that needed to be researched carefully, because what you don't want to have happen is have like your normal cells get the self-destruct message too, right?
Right.
So it's all about targeting the right cells, and so far it seems to be going pretty well. And actually, what's also interesting about this particular research tract is that when you do like, quote unquote anti-aging research, there's still a little bit of a stigma. There used to be like a massive stigma where like no respectable researcher would say they're working on that, right? But with this particular track, it's even easier than other research tracks because senescent cells build up as a side effect of other things too, like chemotherapy. So if you pair these sort of drugs with chemotherapy, it makes the chemotherapy process go better.
Really?
So in a sense, it creates an easier way for researchers to work on this, because
so we're talking about
yeah.
a possible cure for cancer at this point. If they can target the cancer cells and wipe them out with a pill, we've got a cure for cancer here, possibly. Correct?
Well, it's slightly different. What I'm talking about right here is that when you say get radiation therapy or chemotherapy, it's
Right.
basically like a shotgun to your cells and causes some of them to become these zombie cells. So then if you pair it with this therapy, it'll like mitigate that screw up.
So essentially, they won't have the side effects from chemotherapy that you would normally have?
That's the goal, and that's been shown in animal models to be like.
What about literally searching for cancer cells? Now, I remember we had a discussion, and I kept making jokes about Wolverine, about the possibility of discovering a cure for the HIV virus, which is sending something into your body to specifically target that virus and knock it out. And I kind of got conspiracy on you a little bit, because even though I'm fascinated by the research that you're doing, in the back of my head, and I'm just going to be very honest with you, I feel like the pharmaceutical companies, and I'm not trying to be a conspirator here, but I think about this stuff all the time. The pharmaceutical companies aren't going to like the fact that diseases are being cured because it takes away money out of their pockets. And that's been a conspiracy theory for many, 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 many years. And it's one that has validation to it. People get sick every year, and they get, people get diabetes and all kinds of diseases every year, and it's a multi-million-dollar business for them. So wouldn't this kind of cut into them? Like, if we could figure out a way to make us feel overall healthier and kill like the HIV virus, I know it's better for humankind and would definitely help us live better lives, healthier lives, happier lives, and have more sex, because we don't have to worry about the HIV virus. But at the same time, is that not what's going to stop Big Pharma from shutting you down?
Okay, so this is a really good and nuanced question. So, first of all, before I get into that,
I'm worried they're going to show up at your house at 2 a.m. with guns and be like, Keith, hand over the medicine. You know what I'm saying?
I'm honestly not worried about that. Like, I forget forget if this was Freeman Dyson or some famous scientist had, or maybe not even a scientist, some famous person had a quote that was basically this: "Don't attribute to malice what you can attribute to incompetence." And I generally adhere to that. And by that, in this case, I mean, yeah, you're always going to have like profiteering big pharma companies trying to, look out for number one. But I think more what's been getting in the way of progress and the thing we have to overcome is literally just like a calcified system that adapts slowly. And like most of the people that work in the system are like good-hearted people. They're just like stuck in an old paradigm. So I think it's more that, like, overcoming the inertia of like, let's consider aging as something we can actually like address, instead of thinking of it as like special or divine or this biological clock that is, not within the realm of human tinkering or something like that. Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense. It's just that I feel like there's greedy millionaires out there who are going to want to fight against you for this. Just being real with you, like, that's how I feel. I'm not saying that. I was joking about the 2 a.m. gun thing, but curing aging, and we also should talk about this whole like overpopulation myth. Now, we discussed it a little bit in the Thanos video, but you're going to have naysayers come to you and say, well, if human beings are living longer, if we're living, instead of to 80, we're living to 120, is that not going to consume more resources? Would that not put the population back up higher and things like that? How do you respond to that? Like, because I think you debunked it, but how do you respond to like there being more humans on Earth and more food being eaten if you are able to extend our life by even 40 years?
Sure. So I'm first going to plug a specific page that will answer this deeply if anyone wants to read. So you can go to leafscience.org/aging-concerns. And that page has like a whole list of all these like common objections. But now we'll get into your specific objection because it's one of the top two. Overpopulation is maybe number two, and like being super frail is number one. But anyway,
we'll talk about that as well, actually.
Yeah.
But go ahead. Yeah.
So overpopulation, like here's the simple thing: is that it just doesn't happen in actuality. Like,
what about China?
Well, what I mean is this, is that if you look at the historical data, now, yes, you can make a causality correlation kind of argument, but as life expectancy goes up, population growth is inversely related. It goes down, and it sounds counterintuitive.
That does sound very counterintuitive.
But if you think about it, it makes sense because of this reason. One, typically life expectancy increasing is mapped towards like, the more developed the country is. And that also means the simple stuff like women are educated and have contraception, right? And then also more related is that if you're healthier longer, which is also happening, and you're fertile longer, people delay their birth until having children until later in life. And since birth rate is much more an effect on population growth than death rate, since births happen a lot more frequently, it slows down. So it doesn't sound like it makes sense, but it does. So the real answer is that thing that you're afraid of, it's actually the opposite. And there's actually some books that are out right now. Like there's a book called Empty Planet, I forget the author right now, that really make a strong case that in the future, we might actually have an underpopulation problem, not an overpopulation problem, because birth rates are way down and all this stuff.
Yeah, I know Japan's got that problem right now, but does the book foreshadow the entire planet being like this? And is it because of the fear of STDs? Like, what is the...
No, it's literally like you might have seen some like smattering news stories, on mainstream press where like fertility is like dropping, like male fertility in particular. And like there's like a lot of hypotheses, but like no real...
Is it McDonald's fault, bro? Is that what's going on?
I mean, I don't want to speculate, but the general thing is that if you look at it on like a population like global level, it's like birth rates are going down, and a lot more of the population is skewing elderly. So
are Viagra sales going up though?
Well, I imagine yes.
I'm just curious because this is kind of scary.
Well, this is, in the work that we do, we interface not just with researchers, but also with, government organizations like the World Health Organization and the FDA. And these are sort of the cases that are being made to support our research, on the back end when we're in the room with these sort of people. It's like, hey, if you want Social Security to like last for more than 20 years, we got to really make sure we age healthier as a society. Otherwise, what happened in Japan, and if your audience is not familiar with that, basically the birth rate went way down in Japan for like a lot of different interesting reasons that we don't have to
Because men are marrying sex robots? Is that...
Partially, yes. So, I mean, there's a whole like Vice story about this. It's super interesting. So if any of your audience want to track that down, it's like super interesting. But anyway, so birth rates are way down, and then our current healthcare system, so now we can sort of cross over into the other main objection, which is like, oh, I don't want to be like super frail for 50 years. So that fear that people have, which is actually first sort of brought up in an ancient Greek myth of Tithonus, this human that the goddess Eos loved, and she wanted to love him forever. So she asked Zeus to make him immortal, but she forgot to ask Zeus to like keep him young. So he was immortal, but just like super decrepit forever. So everyone's afraid of that when you say, hey, do you want to live 150 years old, right? But the thing is that fear that people have of like maximizing the period of their life where they're super decrepit, that's what our current healthcare system maximizes right now. The kind of stuff we're talking about would maximize your healthy period of life, and they call it compress this period of morbidity.
In other words, you're younger longer. You feel younger longer. You so it's like the Stallone thing, bro. Like this guy's 78 years old, killing it in Rambo, and he's like shredded, and I'm just like, how?
Yeah. And the key thing here is that like this is why I think it's much easier to convince people or to show people that they're already on your side, but they just don't know it yet, rather than to try to convince them to change a position. So in this case, your Stallone example, most people really are on our side here, whether they realize it or not. Because if you see any news story of like some 90-year-old who's in like great shape and they ran a marathon or whatever, what does everyone say? Man, I hope that's me when I'm
right. We all wish that.
Yeah.
If we make it there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. How do you feel about human growth hormone and stem cell research? I feel like that's like the precursor to what you're doing. I've heard, obviously, because I study mixed martial arts and wrestling and boxing a little bit, not as much as MMA and wrestling, but, it's become a topic, performance-enhancing drugs and things like that. But growth hormone seems to be a lot safer, and it's not like a steroid. It actually does improve your conditions in your cells. From everything I've seen, makes you actually more ripped, look better, feel better. And then you have stem cell research, which I've heard that athletes who are getting injured are going down to like Argentina, Brazil, and getting these stem cells put into their knees and their joints, and they're coming back like they're freaking 22 years old. How do you feel about that, and what do you know about it?
Okay, yes. So good questions. So what you just mentioned there is called medical tourism, of like, let me go somewhere else where this isn't as regulated, and
I'm gonna have to do that soon, bro.
Yeah. So basically what I will say is in both cases, long term, I think they will be good. They're part of the puzzle, right? But the thing to watch out for now, especially with stem cells, is the regulations really kind of haven't caught up to it in the right way yet. So you have a lot of clinics that, in my opinion, are like complete bullshit. It's like it's more complicated than just like getting some of your adipose fat cells and like swishing them around in a centrifuge and getting some stem cells and cloning them and throwing them back in your body and thinking everything will be awesome. Like that can cause a lot of inflammation, cause a lot of problems, genetic mutations. That being said, I think that the better version of that stuff will become very important and actually paired with what I was talking about earlier, because how we talked about the senescent cells and how you clear them out, right? Another thing that happens as you get older is your stem cells start to deplete and they can't produce the cells of your body.
Right.
So what you would really want in the future is senolytic drugs to clear out these junk cells, and then stem cell infusion therapies that replace that with, new, ideally like your own vital, like here's I'm going to be a little speculative here, but here's what I would love to see happen in the future.
Okay.
I'm already old. I'm 60 years old, right? I go to some stem cell bank. Sloan Kettering has like a stem cell bank, right? I, get some of my cells or maybe even some of my fat cells, and through a process they can turn them into stem cells. And then that can be done now. The part I'm about to say is not doable yet. Is that who knows? Maybe, even as a 60-year-old, I'm already genetically damaged, right? But maybe some computer algorithm can look at my code sequence of my genes and sort of figure out what the less damaged version of that was, and then synthesize new cells that are essentially like my own stem cells but younger, and then infuse me with those.
So you're kind of creating them sort of like with a 3D printer type thing?
Well, yeah, actually, it's yeah. You could consider it that. There are I forget what they call them. I'm blanking on the name, but there is sort of like a biological 3D printer that already exists. So yeah,
that's crazy. So essentially, it's like the fountain of youth. You just go in the clinic and they give you your cells back brand new. Now, are we talking about if somebody were to do just the basics, not so much the future stuff? Would it be like an injection? Are we talking about surgical? Or are we talking about pills? How would that get into your story?
Yeah, I would think some sort of injection, but the thing to realize, again, this is not, I'm not a molecular biologist by trade. People on our board are, I'm not, so I'm going a little bit far of my own
No, but you talk to these guys like every day, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
But one thing to keep in mind here is that you wouldn't need proportionally a lot of them, because the way that your body works is like you have, if I was going to like shine a light through you that like lit up all of your stem cells, like I might not even see that. It's like there's proportionally very few stem cells and they're just like churning out the somatic cells. They're spinning out copies of themselves in a sense that then differentiate into your skin and your muscles and stuff. So my point is that you don't need a lot of stem cells. You just need them to work properly, as they do when you're younger.
So what is the main goal right now? Obviously, we've talked about this before. Your goal is to extend the quality of life. It's not so much life, it's more so the quality of life. Because you could still die at 80. I mean, you could die from anything. You could die from a car crash. Hopefully not. But I mean, anything can happen. But your goal is more so, is it more so so people are more comfortable in their later years? Or is it to actually extend their time so you can see your grandkids and your great-grandkids and your great-great-grandkids? Is it all that combined? Or is it to cure diseases? Because I feel like curing the fountain of youth, or you're not, let me rephrase that. I feel like not curing, but extending your life out and making your body more healthy is going to, by default, cure some diseases.
Yes.
Because aging, I think you told me before that you believe that aging is a disease.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually been movements to try to get the FDA and the World Health Organization to, in a sense, make that official classification, which we've had some success in doing that, actually.
Well, we all suffer from it, bro. Yeah. So that's the crazy part.
Yeah. So, but to answer your question, you've anticipated the real answer, which is that there is no difference between those things that you said. Is that the only way? Like, let me give you a hypothetical, right? Let's say you're 100 years old as you think of it now. So like you're pretty decrepit, right? And I come through, I'm a freaking wizard. And I wave my hands and I stop your aging completely, right? Mm-hmm. You're still probably going to die within 5 years. You're going to fall and break your hip. You're going to get pneumonia because you're frail, right?
Yeah.
Statistically, it's impossible really to get significant maximal life expectancy without curing diseases and getting youth expectancy, youth expansion.
Something's gonna hit you, is what you're saying.
Well, I'm just saying that the only way, the way that we do get life extension, the way get to that, whatever that movie was. I think you were sort of referencing that movie with what the hell is his name? Justin Timberlake in it, with like In Time, right, where he's like, "This is my mom, this is my grandmother," and they all look the same, right? The only way we're going to get there is by curing the diseases. So the real answer is that it's all one and the same. But what I will say, and I'll be, totally honest with you,
please be. No lies on this show.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to lie on this show.
One of the main things that our field has sort of struggled with over the past 10 years, but is now finally getting it right, in my opinion, is how do you make this value proposition to the public, right? Because you could see easily, just like you did before, you can easily say, well, are you trying to cure diseases here, or you're trying to make us immortal? Where do you lie on this spectrum? And it seems like, and depending on how you phrase those questions, you'll get wildly different support for it, on Pew Research polls and things like that. So what I've personally been trying to do, and hopefully I've been doing a good job in myself as an advocate, is really sort of trying to really be totally authentic at all times and not shy away from any direct question, but to know how to present the right aspect of that authentic message to an audience. So I'll give you a specific example. Some people in our field who are a little bit more of the suit and tie researchers, right? Sometimes they might get hit with both barrels, a question like, hey, do you want to live 200 years old, researcher guy, right? And a lot of the researchers will not want to say yes. They'll be like, well, it's all about health, and it's not really about life expectancy. It's not about me. It's about the socioeconomics, and that's all totally true, right? But yeah, and I would say all that stuff as well. But I would also say, hey, if you're asking me directly, would I want to live to be 150 years old as a healthy person? I'm going to say yes, and I'm not going to make any bones about that, because really, part of the value proposition in telling people that life extension is good is the fact that life is good and you love it, right? So I'm not going to pretend that I don't.
Well, not everybody does.
Well, I mean, if you do, right? I'm saying that that's part of the value proposition, right? It's not a great value proposition to say life is suffering and shit. Here, have 50 more years of that shit.
Well, what if somebody doesn't want to live 50 more years but wants to die in a more peaceful way? What if somebody wants to pass away but have it be, I guess, more pain-free? Is there any studies on that? Am I
Well,
making
what
sense
I
to you?
would say, yeah, what I would say is that these technologies would facilitate that because what it really is, if you think about it, just like all medicine, going back to, Hippocrates in ancient Greece, all that
You
medicine
bring
really
up Greece a
does.
lot. It's funny.
Well, it's a lot of the medical, um, nomenclature and stuff has its root there. But basically, all it really is if you think about it, an extension of choice. Gives you more agency in your
Right,
life.
right.
You could always choose, like, all right, I don't want to get that surgery. Like, that's always your choice, right? But it's good to have that choice.
Agreed, for sure. No, we're in agreement there. So you might not be allowed to talk about this yet, but I'm going to ask you anyways. The projects that are being worked on, obviously, nanotech is many years away. I mean, we were close because the microprocessors. I mean, the things are getting better and better, dude. We've got entire computers in our cell phones now, so things are getting better. But future, that's the future, the present. So what is the goal right now currently for lifespan as far as scientifically goes? Is there a specific disease you're looking to get rid of? Like an actual disease, not aging, but like, cancer, AIDS, diabetes. Is there something you're specifically focusing on? Is there, like, what is the current, like, what can we do now? What can lifespan do now, with the current tech that we have? Or is there anything they can do?
Sure. All right, let me tease that out into two questions. The first one being, what can we do now? What can you do now, right? And as it stands right now, the stuff you and your audience can do that will be best to preserve healthy aging, or however you want to phrase it, is the things that you already know, the things your mama told you. Sleep enough, try not to stress yourself out, exercise in moderation. Those are literally, like, they call them the social part of what's called the social determinants of health, and they still account for the majority. That being said, I'll now pivot to question number two of what's happening now research wise, what's in the near term.
Right.
So I would say what are the nearest term things are, again, keep your eyes on the senescent cell therapies, the senolytic drugs. Also, one of the projects that we funded last year has to do with this Harvard researcher, David Sinclair, who did a lot of the original work in like resveratrol and red wine. And he is doing research in this substance, this molecule called NMN, which is, long story short, it's something that seems to be very safe. You could probably get it in supplement form. Actually, I know you can sell it now. I don't want to hawk any particular supplement, but there's certain small molecules that basically seem to upregulate your DNA repair capabilities. And there's sort of a lot of excitement starting about this. So there's companies like Elysium that people might have heard of. It's a little bit of a different molecule, but this company Elysium is sort of banking on a similar molecule that does the same sort of stuff. NASA is interested in this because increased DNA repair mechanisms would help astronauts because they get hit by cosmic radiation, which causes DNA breaks and such.
Right.
So those small molecules like that. You mentioned human growth hormone.
Yes.
So something that's interesting right now is diabetes is starting to be looked at in a different way. Like it's almost like a form of aging or advanced aging. Inflammation can cause a lot of accelerated aging phenotypes, aspects, physical manifestations in the body. And in a sense, diabetes is sort of like super ramped up inflammation. So because of that, drugs that have been used for diabetes, like metformin and DHEA, are starting to be used now in trials that maybe they'll actually make you live longer. And there's a whole National Geographic special about how metformin is being looked at, and your audience can Google that. But to tie it to human growth hormone, something that just happened very recently was we have a conference every year in New York City, and it was in July this year. And one of the researchers there, his name is Dr. Greg Fahey. He presented some research where he, in a human study, I believe, with 9 patients. So it's a small study, needs to be replicated, but it was using DHEA, metformin, and human growth hormone. And what it appeared to be doing is regenerating the thymus in the body, which is, amongst other things, responsible for immune system response, etc. And by doing that, the results showed that one of these markers that are used to assess your aging, it's called the epigenetic clock, Horvath's clock. It showed that these people were, in that metric, 2.5 years younger. And that went sort of mainstream, like all over the news. And actually, you mentioned the Young Turks earlier. When that happened, I hooked him up with the Young Turks. So this will probably be a few days prior to whenever you release this. It'll be late October. This Dr. Greg Fahey will be giving an interview on one of the Young Turks shows. So
might already be up by the time people hear this.
Yeah. So that was a little bit long-winded answer, but my point is that yes, human growth hormone is being implicated in some of these potential repair therapies.
So human growth hormone is sort of like the base, I guess we can say. Well, you said your mama taught you, but when it comes to like more advanced therapies, you're saying human growth hormone is sort of like the base of where if we can take that formula and enhance it more and more and more and more and more without overdosing. But it's expensive, man. From what I understand, some of the athletes that take it are paying $2,000 a month for this, man. Not everybody can afford that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and again, I'm a little bit concerned about people maybe not doing the best practices with it and such. So I don't want to say that human growth hormone is like a panacea or anything like that. All I'm saying is that it seems to be like it might be part of the puzzle in some of these combination therapies that are potentially bearing fruit.
Yeah, so now one thing about DHEA is I take DHEA because it was recommended to me at the health food store because it's not a prescription medicine. You can go to the health food store and buy DHEA. And that's the same one we're talking about, right? It doesn't have to be prescription. It could just be regular DHEA.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to defer on this one since I don't have the knowledge of every substance loaded into my RAM. But yeah, because I know that it might have some confusion with like the stuff in fish oil, which is like, I'm not sure if that's the same stuff or a different stuff.
Well,
but
fish oil is also good for you.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody says that.
I'm looking it up right now just to refresh myself.
Yeah, because I have DHEA. I actually would look for the jar. I don't even know where I put it at here. It was it wasn't prescription. It was just
It says that there's supplements for DHEA. So yeah, it sounds like what you said is correct.
Yeah, right here I have DHEA supports healthy hormone production. Yeah, that was recommended to me because they're like, yo, if you're a man, you should take this when you hit 30 from a company called Nutridine. There's a billion different companies, but this is not prescription. This can be purchased by anybody at a health food store. So it's the same kind of DHEA. So if you're out there and you're a man, take DHEA.
I am not a doctor. Consult your doctor.
I am not a doctor, but I remember when I started taking it because I went through I haven't told you the story yet at all, or anybody, but I went through a major depression last year and I started eating really bad. I mean, I went through a depression. Like I was so depressed that I was just eating fast food every day. Just every day, Burger King, Taco Bell, every day. And I started to feel really bad after a while. It didn't happen right away, but it did. And then I started taking DHEA, and it really, really made me feel better. Like it actually made me feel. Let's just say that when I woke up in the morning, I felt really, really good. If you know what I'm saying, I felt like a man. How about that? So DHEA is great, yo. And it's a natural supplement too. It's like, hey, what's this? Great. I can't go to work yet because my pants won't fit. No, I'm kidding, but I'm over exaggerating. I have a small penis, but no, I'm joking. No, but DHEA is good though. It does and it's natural. So combining that with metformin and human growth hormone took off 2.5 years of aging essentially.
Again, caveats that this was a proxy measure that's used to assess aging. So, I want to be careful in what I'm saying here. Of
course.
Yeah. So there's this thing called the Horvath epigenetic clock. So if your audience wants to. Horvath, that's the doctor's name, Dr. Steve Horvath, who came up with it.
Well, if you're taking bats with whores, then maybe the pill is working. But no.
That's with a V, not a B. Horvath, not bath.
That's too bad because Horvath sounds better.
Yes. But in case you want a little bit more information about that, what that essentially is, this would actually lead to another interesting topic called biomarkers, where as you have your DNA, which is like your code, right? But as you live, like modifications happen sort of on top of your DNA that make certain regions like more likely to produce proteins and certain regions less likely. So you can think of them like salt on the pretzel of your DNA. You know, like you can wipe the salt off, more salt can go on. It changes how your DNA is expressed. And certain changes kind of happen more or less linearly as you go on. So you can sort of use how much of these changes have happened as kind of like a clock. And that's what this clock was. So this combination therapy showed a reversal in that metric. Hopefully that made sense.
No, that doesn't make sense. I mean, it makes no sense, but it makes sense. So you made it make sense.
Good enough.
Yeah. It's like the Krusty the Clown thing. It's not good. It's good enough. So, but a lot of the research being done for this, it's you and like several, like, who are some of the people that you're allowed to say who are involved in the project? I think you mentioned there's some pretty interesting investors in there.
Sure. So this is like almost impossible to answer because there's too many players. But what I would say,
big ones.
Yeah, what I would say is this: is that like on the research side, you have a lot of players that are coming to the table that are the people that you might expect. Harvard Medical School, Stanford, like mainstream medical focused universities, right? Now they're coming on board now because the field is becoming more legitimate. I would say there's a few organizations that we work with now that we're kind of the vanguard of this whole, let's look at aging as a disease. How do we classify it? How do we attack the root causes of aging? So one organization definitely worth mentioning is the SENS, S-E-N-S Research Foundation. This was sort of front-manned by this person, Aubrey de Grey, that some of your audience might be familiar with. He kind of has this very recognizable wizard beard. And he was a guy like 15 years ago. And it's actually a very interesting full circle story here because I forget, it was around 15 years ago. There was like MIT came at him really hard. And they had this like technology review that was basically like a competition for all the mainstream researchers that was like, hey, let's have this summit. And your goal, researchers, is to like write papers on how this guy's full of shit, basically. And what happened at the end of it is that they couldn't really unseat his theories. And they said it in some very funny way. It was like, we could not prove that this was not utter bullshit or something. It was more eloquent, but it was basically that, right? Right. But the full circle component of that is literally like last month's edition of that same outlet, like the MIT Technology Review, was all about the hallmarks of aging, that what we're talking about, which was basically what he was shouting from the rooftops back then. So it's kind of a good story of like, the world caught up, like just now.
He
like
was
a month
ahead of
ago.
his time.
Yeah. So. And actually on our site right now on lifespan.io, we're currently crowdfunding for a particular research project. I believe it will be done successfully right about when you release this episode. But yeah, your audience could check that out at lifespan.io/Mito Mito mouse. Again, it'll probably be gloriously completed successfully by the time your audience looks, but you can check it out.
What does the project entail?
Sure, this
Without
was like
going into detail, whatever you can say.
So basically, one of these things that goes wrong with you as you age is your mitochondria, which hopefully everybody remembers from high school. The powerhouse of the cell.
Powerhouse of the cell.
Here you go. I mean, it worked. I remembered it. So these kind of start to malfunction as you get older, and one of the reasons why is that, which you also might remember from high school, or the PlayStation game Parasite Eve, if anyone ever played that game. Classic, yes. So that game was like all about this. Like your mitochondria are like, they have unique DNA from the rest of your body. So what happens is, because the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, it's like a nuclear reactor and spitting out free radicals, basically causing a lot of damage, right, to itself. Mm-hmm. And there's about 1,000 genes that make up the code for new mitochondria that's going to be being made. But because it's like a nuclear reactor, throughout the course of evolution, most of that DNA, a copy of it, is also in the nucleus now of your cell. because that's like a bomb shelter, right? But 13 genes didn't quite make it yet through evolution, the slow process. So this project is basically like finishing that job, creating backup copies of those 13 remaining genes in the nucleus, thereby stopping mitochondria from screwing up as you get older.
So that's the main thing about lifespan seems to be that you guys are, rather than targeting sort of ways to cover up aging, with creams and things like that. It seems like what you're doing is legit targeting the core of everything, the cells and the atoms, the things that we cannot see with the naked eye, and the importance of them. Because when you read about cells in high school, like I read about them, you don't really think about that kind of stuff. Like, when you're living your normal day to day, you don't think about that kind of stuff. But lifespan and your people seem to be really focused on getting to the bottom of things as opposed to just covering it up. Like, we're talking about actually modifying your molecular structure here, which is going to scare some people, man. Like that, they scare because you're messing around with things, with you're tinkering with your, as they said in The Simpsons, tinkering with your ticker. You're tinkering with your the things that make you who you are. If that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I would say that's valid. But what I would say also is that it's always helpful to know the proper context. So let's take like genetic engineering writ large, GMOs, right? There's almost like fear mongering, like labels on your food, like no GMOs, But that's sort of naive, because the real thing to realize is that these sort of technologies or these sort of practices have been done literally since behaviorally modern humans in the Fertile Crescent or whatever. It's like, because when you're doing like crop crossbreeding to make your bananas bigger or whatever.
Isn't that what DHEA does? Make my banana
bigger? As I said that, I realized that.
You set me up, bro. You set me up yes, good with that.
Yes, unintentional. But that's what you're really doing there is genetic engineering. You're just doing it like willy-nilly.
So you're telling me that lifespan can help me get a bigger penis size? Because if you start selling that, you're really going to make money.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
No. This is not about money, though.
With your penis in particular, that's a big challenge.
It's a huge challenge. But we're talking about maybe 40 years. But no, to clarify, your organization, is it a non-profit? Like,
yes. So
I'm hearing some wind in the background. Are you outside?
Oh no, sorry. Well, I'm in New York, so maybe some New York City ghosts were around. Are we good now?
Sure, but I still wonder what the hell that was.
I don't know. Ghost. Let's go ghost.
All right. Are you turned the air on? Is what it is.
No, I didn't. I have no idea what you heard. You could be just also crazy.
I could be, because I keep hearing like wind blowing in my ear, like from where you're at. I hope it's on the recording. But anyways, okay. So is it a non-profit or what? What is it? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so we're a 501c3 nonprofit, and what we really do.
So don't worry, people. This is not a scam. That's the point, right?
I mean, certain nonprofits, I'm sure, can be underhanded. We're not.
Gotcha.
We're above board. But basically, just so your audience is clear, like, I'm not in the lab myself doing the research. We're basically, you can think of it like almost like a vetting organization that we find the researchers that are doing what we think are the most credible work that could use the kind of support that we can give, and we direct public attention and funding for that. Which has been going wildly well. We've raised almost $500,000 for key research projects. And when you're at the proof of concept phase, that can go a long way. You might only need $50,000 to get a pilot study going. Now, when you try to commercialize it or something, that's when you get hit with a $5 million value of death, they call it, right? But personally, what I'm excited about, what I see our organization's goal is to basically emulate what the cancer advocates did, or the cancer research advocates did in the 1940s. I'll be brief here, but it's an interesting story. There's a book called The Emperor of All Maladies that was a New York Times bestseller by Siddhartha Mukherjee that sort of tells this story in depth if your audience wants to look it up.
Right.
But basically, this was news to me when I read it like 10 years ago. Basically, like in the 40s, like nobody gave a shit about cancer in America. Like if your uncle had cancer, you just sort of like put him in the corner and nobody talked about him. And it all changed by the work of basically like two people. There was this woman, Mary Lasker, that was like a socialite, and she had some influence. And then she, her husband had cancer, so she had a vested interest. So she found who was doing kind of the most credible research at the time. His name was Sidney Farber. He was doing basically what was the earliest like chemotherapy kind of work. So that was like step one, like find like credible research, right? Then step two is the most interesting. What she did next, or what they did next, was basically like PR maneuvers. They created the Jimmy Fund, which people might remember. It's still around, but they basically did like, Jimmy Lewis style like telethons and what they did was they realized
Jerry Lewis?
Oh yeah, Jerry Lewis.
Who the hell is Jimmy Lewis?
Oh come on, Jimmy! You don't know Jimmy?
No, I only know Jiznak the Gusher.
Yeah, different story.
But
anyway, to be really quick, so what they smartly realized is that like, okay, people might not care about cancer, this far off amorphous thing, but let's build this movement around this kid, Jimmy. His name wasn't even Jimmy, but they were like, they had these telethons and people calling in. They raised all this awareness and they built up this essentially a grassroots movement about why this is important. And then they used that leverage to take out like full page articles in like the New York Times and stuff that basically said like, hey, President Nixon, like, what the hell are you doing? We need funding, dying here. And that worked. And then that became the birth of the war on cancer. So when I read this, I was like, holy shit, like this is like the roadmap that's like totally analogous. So like what we're really trying to do with Leaf is, the crowdfunding is like step one, like get some credible research. Now what we're in now with like doing interviews on the Young Turks and having like 150,000 people on our Facebook pages and doing like we have like a YouTube show now.
Now you're in the big time, the Geekdom101 podcast.
There we go. Yeah, we actually have a show that's like kind of like the SciShow style, lifespan.io/X10 if people are interested in that. And we're basically
X10 as in XTEN or X and then 10.
X10.
Okay, just clarifying that.
Yeah, thank you. And we're starting to have a lot of success in sort of radiating this message out. And then now we're kind of also in step three. I can't really disclose fully everything that we're doing behind the scenes, but I'm trying to get people who are in the NIH and the NIA kind of in a room with like major power players in the government, so that they can explain, like how the budget could be better. Like, let me give you some examples of a few numbers that don't make sense. There was a very credible study that came out a few years ago that basically showed that even if we just slow down the onset of the major killers like heart disease, cancer, and Alzheimer's. Just slow it down. Slow it down by 20%. It would save $142 billion per year in American healthcare costs. Now, juxtapose that with the fact that currently in the NIH and such, the U.S. government is only spending about $6 billion per year on like cancer therapies. And furthermore, only like really $200 million on things like genetic instability, which cause all cancers and everything else. So like you look at those three numbers together and that makes no sense.
Well, I'm still curious about when Big Pharma's going to step in and say, nope, we need that. We need those billions, buddy. I'm worried about you.
Well, here's what I would say is that
I don't trust them. All right, I'm being real with you. Obviously, I don't trust them.
Well, we obviously interface with Big Pharma and stuff sometimes, and what I will say is this: is that a lot of the therapies are not going to be a one and done sort of thing. They're going to be things that you're going to need to, repair yourself periodically, right?
It's like a supplement. It'll take time.
Yeah, my point is that I'm sure Big Pharma could find a way to squeeze you on these things too.
Plus, not to mention that if you're living another 40 years, they might squeeze you from something else as well. Oh, yeah. Take a new vaccine. And I'm not a fan of the vaccines, man. It's not my thing. Well, I believe in natural cures.
Herd immunity is important, so that's all I'll say on that. But it is a thing. I don't want to get into any sort of argument, but
No, I believe you. I'm just telling you about me. You know what I mean?
All right. Well, don't blow it for the kids. Don't give them polio.
No, I'm fine with that. I've gotten my vaccine as a kid. I meant like when I'm an adult, because I feel like they're asking for new ones every couple of years, and it's like, ugh, leave me alone.
Yeah, but so basically, I think the people
I didn't piss you off, did I? I'm just telling you about my naivety here.
No, not at all, not at all. I just want to go on the record as saying that I think vaccines are important because statistically, I forget what exactly the number is, but you do need something like 95% of the population or whatever to be on board. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And then you get like the resurgence of,
You're talking about vaccines, not necessarily your stuff, correct?
Yeah, like this is how you prevent.
No, I got my vaccines, bro. It's just that I feel like they're always asking us for. Like every time I go to Walgreens, they're asking me for a vaccine shot. Leave me alone.
All I'm saying is I don't want the resurgence of the Black Plague to be the fault of Geekdom. So
no, that'll be the fault of YouTube commenters, bro. At this point, it'll be Disney's fault. We can't say that because you work for them now. So damn, man.
Don't get me in trouble, bro.
No, I can't do that. But no, well, hopefully, Lifespan will have a complete cure for the Black Plague, and then we're good.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah, right. Because I feel like the plague is part of bad cells, and we're trying to make all the bad cells good.
Well, I really don't know enough about this, but I could have swore I recently read some headline. Again, I didn't read into it. Maybe it was bullshit, but I thought it was there was some lab somewhere in the Ukraine that had vials of all these wicked diseases that exploded or something like that. That sounds like the beginning of the movie Outbreak or something.
It does. That sounds like a Resident Evil game waiting to happen, bro.
Yeah. Was the city called Raccoon City?
Right. Maybe the raccoons are the ones that have the infestation. Las Plagas. So before we get out of here, man, go ahead and plug once again the project and anything else you want to say to wrap up this whole thing. Go for it. The floor is yours. Anything you want to speak to the people about who might be listening? Anything?
Yeah. Well, the main thing I'll say is that I would like to leave your audience with a note of optimism and excitement. In that, again, literally, this goal of trying to remediate the diseases of aging is the first hero's quest ever. If your audience has heard of the monomyth and the hero with 1,000 faces and all that stuff, the epic. Sure. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the first version of that.
Homer's The Odyssey.
Yeah. And if you think about it, it's you and I, if we do anything to help this, it's we are, in a sense, completing that first hero's journey, our human hero's journey.
What you're saying is that after we're long gone, future generations might take the work that you guys are doing and actually change the world in a huge way, maybe some Star Trek shit. Science fiction becomes science fact.
We're at a critical moment in human history right now, and it's worth it to take a moment to feel that and own it and be a part of it. Because let me give you one number and then I'll plug the specific things. But basically, 150,000 people die every single day. And 2/3 of that, a little bit more than 2/3 of that, is due to the diseases of aging. That's 100,000 people every day, one person-ish every second. That's a bigger killer by far than anything else you've ever heard of. Gun violence, whatever, disease, anything. This is the major reaper. And
always has been since the beginning of time.
So if you flip that math around, that means that if your audience or if you somehow, by literally just mentioning this to someone, helping us, having a dinner table conversation, if all you do is move the needle up on this stuff happening by 1 second, you've saved someone from a horrible death. And that's meaningful, right? So that being said, if your audience wants to help us, you can go to lifespan.io/hero. That's how you can donate. You can go to lifespan.io/help to see other ways if you want to get involved. We have a Discord, YouTube, Facebook, all that jazz. And if you're interested in the projects or the news, you can go to lifespan.io/news. And if you're interested in that YouTube show, lifespan.io/x10. And, on our websites, there's tons of information, all this stuff about addressing these issues that people might have. What about immortal dictators and all that kind of stuff? There's answers for all that stuff if you're curious.
But immortal dictators. Who would ask that question?
Some people are worried about that kind of stuff.
They're worried that the government's going to take this treatment and keep it for themselves and live forever?
Yep, that we call that one only for the rich, and there's that's a valid concern. There are answers for it too, but people have a lot of questions.
Well, the rich will probably have first access to it. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think in some cases, yes, but then again, look at cell phones, right? That's a good map. It's maybe they'll have a few years head start on certain therapies, but it'll trickle down. And also, you have people like me that one of the main things that I like to focus on is open source. That's why all the projects on our site are open source. Anything that we fund, if there's a paper that results from it, you get to read that paper. So the information gets out to everybody. That's one way you can head off that issue at the pass, is make sure the power to the people, basically, right?
Right. Well, it's funny because it just reminds me. It really reminds me of that scene from Star Trek 4, a great movie with Doc Bones, who's what do you have? Dialysis.
Damn it, Chip.
He's like, dialysis. We're talking about medievalism here, and he gives you that medicine and magically cures the dialysis. I'm hoping that one day we have that where we can just take a pill, a little white pill, and it'll cure like serious stuff like that. Like, I had a friend of mine who had their gallbladder removed for some reason, had gallstones. Shouldn't there be some pill that can get rid of that? Sometimes there is, but sometimes there's not. You know what I'm saying?
I'll do you one better. What I'm really waiting for after this is I'm waiting for a pill that I could take where I could just eat whatever the hell I want and still be fit. That's what I'm waiting for.
They sold a pill like that in the 90s. That was a scam. I remember seeing the infomercials. It wasn't even, I want to ask you about one more thing before you go, but the infomercials were about this pill that if you take it when you eat, it takes the fat out of the food and stores it, and then you shit it out. And I don't think that's real, dude.
I mean, it sounds like it would be a scam. I mean, maybe in the future with like nanotechnology and stuff, that would be more on the table. It reminds me of an episode of Aqua Teen Hunger Force from back in the day, where there was like a pill like that, but what it really was just like it gave you tapeworms.
Now we're talking about controlled tapeworms, right? Ones that can be controlled with a cell phone app. That's scary, bro. That's a scary thought to put some. I mean, it really is scary, the nanotech going into your body. I feel like, it has good intentions, but you never know. It could rip up your heart if it falls to the wrong hands.
Well, that's a whole
movie
other
waiting
topic.
to happen.
Well, there's that whole thing that's like the fear of nanotechnology is the gray goo scenario. So if your audience wants to have some fun, they can look up the gray goo scenario.
How do you feel about Kevin Trudeau? Because he kind of got exposed as a scam artist, but, he went around saying there was a cure for every disease, and he put out that book, right? And I remember reading that book. I borrowed it from somebody at my job. I didn't pay for it. And the entire first edition of that book is him talking shit about the pharma companies and nothing about cures. It was just him constantly talking shit about the pharma companies. And at the end, it's like, if you want cures, you got to sign up for my newsletter and pay like $6 a month, and we'll do it. Like, what an asshole. And then I think future editions had like, natural cures, but a lot of them were just like fucking what was it? What was that shit that you drink? A lot of it was like red wine, fruits, and vinegar, apple cider vinegar, which is good for you. But how do you feel about that guy? Like, do you remember that guy?
Yeah, well, I would say this is I haven't read it, so I can't judge. But what I'll say in general is that, yeah, you're always going to have some people that are playing like the huckster angle or working for pharma or something like that. But one thing to keep in mind is because you'll hear other people like Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and Larry Page from Google, etc. Big companies and stuff are going to try to get into the space. Google created its company Calico. Facebook created, or Zuck created the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, right? And what you'll see a lot when these sort of people who have success in other fields try to cross over into this, they're very grandiose in what they say they can do. And I really think it's that they literally it's not that they're trying to trick you. It's that they literally think it's like technology. And maybe Theranos kind of falls into this bucket a little bit as well, where it's just like, we'll just get the funding and we can figure it out later. The guys will figure it out. Where like code is sort of like that, but biotechnology ain't like that, right? So you can't just like get the money and figure it out later. Like this shit is hard, and like you have physical constraints in the material world to deal with, right? So I think a lot of it is that too, just like people overestimating what they think they can do with X amount of money.
Right. Well, thank you for being here, man. It was a pleasure talking to you again, and I had a good time, and hopefully people will check it out. It's a very different show than what I usually do, but it's one that I wanted to do because I genuinely hope that these projects, all of them, take off so we can at least be in less pain. At the very least, I don't mind dying at 80. Honestly, I don't. 100 would be nicer. Maybe you can help me with that, but less pain and having a nice, fulfilling life where you can go out and not be in pain all the time, I think is that's something worth fighting for.
I can definitely agree to that. And thanks so much for having me on to talk about this important topic. It's been awesome. Thanks.
Of course, man. Well, you're welcome to come back anytime. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.